3, 2, 1.
Laurel and Joanna are going to be interviewing today. So let's start off with who you are.
My name's Richard Talley.
We're going to be asking you questions about the Navy and your experiences, so I'll let Joanna start by asking you questions.
All right, before I dive into your time in the Navy, first let's get a little bit of background information. When and where were you born?
I was born in December 1946 in the middle of a snowstorm. My mom and dad almost didn't get me to the hospital, but luckily I survived. And actually my mom was sledding that night in the snowstorm, and there was a large hill. She was sledding down the hill on a sled, and I think that got things going, and off to the hospital we went.
All right, can you tell me a little bit more about your childhood growing up?
My childhood as I was growing up, yes, I'd be glad to, although it brings back not fond memories. My childhood was lived in a dysfunctional home with an alcoholic father who beat my mother and my older brother and sister, while my younger brother and I hid under the beds, fearful of his wrath. He drank all the time and was not a very good provider, and so we moved. The home I was actually born in was kind of like a frontier home. It was a farm home with no running water. For water, we primed a pump that was in the kitchen sink, threw water down it, primed the pump, out came the water that was used for dishes and for bathing. We'd fill up a steel tub, and we put the steel tub on the floor of the kitchen, and that's where my brother and I would take our baths. People running in and out of the kitchen while we were doing so, including my little brother, who one time stepped on my glasses and broke them while I was taking my bath, causing my mother great distress because we had no money. We heated the home with coal, and my mom would get the fire going. It was cold. My brother and I slept upstairs in the upstairs of this home, freezing to death. No indoor plumbing, of course, no indoor bathroom, so we used the outhouse out and back. So we learned not to drink much water in the evening, so we didn't have to make that trip out there. It was not pleasant. And that's the home I grew up in till I was about 6 years old, and we moved in town, scraped up enough money for some rent in a house. The house we moved into in town actually had a bathroom. So my brother and I appreciated having a bathroom to not have to use the outhouse. And we still, my mom worked 2 jobs to try to provide for us, and my brother and I walked about 2.5, 3 miles to school, but unlike some people, it was not uphill both ways, but we walked in the snow or whatever it was, about 3 miles to school every day and back. We took care of ourselves. My mom scraped up enough money to buy my brother and I each a bicycle for the summer. So we roamed the streets, getting food out of neighbors' gardens and apple trees and whatever we could get, because there wasn't a lot at home. So after a while, they figured out we weren't paying the rent, so they evicted us. And so we spent the next number of years moving from place to place not really having any home in particular to go to. When I was what would be middle school, 7th, 8th grade, we lived in this duplex that, again, didn't have a bathroom in the house. So again, here I am, a young teenager, taking my bath in a steel tub on the floor of the kitchen. And there was one toilet for both apartments. The neighbor lady was German, and she had these grandchildren that came over, and the one toilet was on the back porch between the duplexes. There was a curtain, there was a window, but a curtain on the bathroom, and the curtain was on the outside. So her grandchildren would come along when we were using the facility and pull the curtain open and watch us. So that wasn't very good. And eventually my father's brother died and willed us a house that we could call our own. It would probably be considered a dump by anybody's standards, except it was a house for ourselves. It actually had a bathroom. I had my own bedroom for a change. And we lived there, and I did odd jobs. I've actually only had 4 jobs in my life, where a lot of these people nowadays, young people, will have 4 jobs in a couple of years. But I worked as a bagger at Kroger store during the last couple of years of high school. Never had a vehicle, rode my bike, worked there till I graduated.
All right, and did you enter the Navy right out of high school?
Right out of high school, yes, I did, actually. Graduated in June of 1964. 1964, not 1984. At that time, kids in my class basically went 2 different directions. They either got married and got a job at the local factory, or they went in the military. Not many, I would say 10%, went to college and out of my class. It was a working families, Germans and Italians mostly. And so, not having any money, there was no chance to go to college. High school taught me some skills, but nothing where I could enter the workforce, so I decided to go in the Navy. And so that's what I pursued, a career in the Navy.
All right, and you started boot camp in September of '64?
September 64, yes, I entered the Navy boot camp, and the reason I chose the Navy was because my older brother was my hero at the time, because he's the one that would fend off my father's drunken violence toward us. And so he had gone into the Navy years earlier, and so being my hero, and I decided to join the Navy. So I went into basic training in September of 1964. I had 2 choices. The Navy boot camps were either in Great Lakes, Illinois, which is north of Chicago, but I knew that it was going to be winter by the time boot camp was done, because it was at that time 16 weeks. So the other boot camp alternative would have been San Diego, California, which would have been at least somewhat warmer during the latter part of the boot camp training. And also my brother happened to live in San Diego, California at that time, raising hybrid Arabian racehorses at the time. He had a ranch. And so I went to San Diego for boot camp. And during the latter part of high school, there were 3 other friends and I decided to join together. And so we went in under something called the buddy program. And there were 3 other guys. We all got there at the same time. The one guy had always played in the band. And so he went right away, rather than being in my company, he went into the band company. And so he was a Navy musician. The other 2 and I were in the same company in boot camp, which is 80 guys form the company, 2 platoons of 40 guys each. Each platoon has 4 squads of 10. So they're mostly guys from New Jersey, Texas, and Tennessee in our company. And so 3:30 in the morning, yes, Virginia, there is a 3:30 a.m., although I was only familiar with the 3:30 p.m. at the time. 3:30 in the morning, the drill instructors start banging with their sticks on the side of your rack. A rack is a bed in the dormitory, and getting you up. So you figure, where's the fire? At 3:30 in the morning, must be a fire. The sun's not up, won't be up for a couple hours. So they get you up, they line you up out on this big parking lot called a grinder, and you march around for a while, for a couple hours till sunup. Then you do some exercises, then you have chow, that's breakfast. Then you march around some more, then you have chow, and you march around and exercise some more, and then you have more chow. And most people did as they were told. Some people did not do what they were told, and you did not want to be one of those people.
All right, what sort of things did you learn in boot camp?
In boot camp, I learned cooperation. I learned to get along with people of different backgrounds, cooperation, comradeship. I learned to take orders. I learned to be early, to be on time. Being on time meant you were late. And if you were ever late, you might as well not show up at all. So they trained us in a bunch of areas that we were going to use later on in the military.
All right, did you need to learn about, the language of the sea and the ships, like belay that and all that sort of thing?
Belay that order, matey? Yes. Tying knots. What knots are good for what? We learned about 80 different knots with ropes and what they were used for, what they shouldn't be used for. We learned how to, with a rope, make a sling that you could actually put a person into, like a basket, with knots to, say, transport a shipmate, an injured shipmate, to a hospital ship or something at sea. So we learned a lot of things like that. We had a pretend ship where we practiced starboard and port, fore and aft, what a bulkhead is, what a deck is, all that stuff. We learned how to shoot a weapon, which was good information even till this day. Safety of weapons, safety at sea, and all of that.
Being in the Navy, I'm sure you had to know how to swim. Did you know that going in?
Going in, I knew how to swim. the reason I knew how to swim is because not only did we have ponds and quarries in our neighborhood that we used to swim in, but there was a municipal pool. And for 20 cents, you could swim all day. The water was clean and fresh. The female lifeguards made our day. And sometimes some of the guys would pretend like they were having trouble in the water to be rescued, but I never did that. So yes, we learned how to swim because being in the Navy, there were times in my basic training where they would throw us in the water. They would throw everybody in the deep end. They didn't ask you if you knew how to swim or not. They threw you in the deep end. So some of us swam to the other side, and some people would start flailing around, and the divers were in the water, and they would kind of wait for these people who were flailing to get tired, and before they drowned, they would always rescue them, and then they would send them to a different company to learn how to swim. So yeah, I knew how to swim.
All right, online I found a pamphlet about boot camp back in the 60s, and it said that recruits needed to learn firefighting. Is that true?
Firefighting. One of my least favorite things in boot camp, other than the food and 3 a.m., was firefighting. Yes, because you never know when on a vessel or a shore station a fire is going to break out. So you need to know about firefighting, that there's Class A fires with wood and paper and stuff, and you put those out with water. And Class B fires, which are oil fires, which you put out with foam. And Class C fires, which are electrical fires, which they made very clear that you don't put an electrical fire out with water. You have to use the spray like what you see hanging on in the hallways of buildings and stuff, the carbon dioxide canisters. So everybody enjoyed the firefighting week at boot camp. So we observed other companies in our company going into these buildings, and they would start them on fire. And the guys are all in there, 80 of them. And the black smoke is billowing out. And so we watched that. They took them in a line and brought them out. And I observed that the first guys in, kind of like an accounting method, first in, last out. And then the last guy's in, last in, first out. And everybody was coughing, but I'm sure those poor guys in the front of the line did a lot more coughing. So I kind of made my way to the back of the line where I could be close to the back, where I didn't have to be in there so long, and I could be one of the first ones out. But it was still coughing. So firefighting was a big deal. There was gas. They put some kind of gas on us too on a different time, and I don't know that it was just probably like pepper spray, only 100 times worse. I don't know if it was mustard gas or what kind of gas it was, but we were in this building and they sprayed that stuff on us so nobody could see anything, and everybody ran out coughing and choking. So they needed to do that because when you're on a vessel or someplace, and you need to practice what you're going to do, because if you don't, then a fire or something will happen and you'll just be a victim. So you have to be aggressive and you know, objective to making yourself not a victim. You want to be a survivor. So yeah.
All right, you were in boot camp from September of 1964 to December of 1964, and then in January of 1965, you were an A School Machinist mate. Can you tell me about that?
A School Machinist mate. Well, I declined to have my basic training in Great Lakes, Chicago, because it was going to be cold. So I had my boot camp where my brother was in San Diego. But for the A School, Machinist Mate School, the only place was Great Lakes in January. So it was below zero, cold, windy, snowy, the whole deal with that. And having grown up the way I did, I was familiar only with a hammer and a screwdriver. So they gave us these tests and basic training to see what our aptitudes were. And while I scored high in math, the kind with Greek letters and swiggly doohickeys, and physics and science, I did the poorest in name these tools. What would you use this tool for? And stuff like that. The whole mechanical thing. That was my poorest score. So they made me a machinist mate. So that's kind of the way of the military. They don't use personnel with match their aptitudes. They just wing it. So at Machinist Mate A School, I learned the operation and maintenance of various components that I would find in the engine room on any naval vessel, to include pumps, valves of all kinds. There's probably 6 or 7 different valves, 3 different pumps we learned about, centrifugal pumps and reciprocating pumps, and another one, valves, condensers, what they're for, what they do, all of which I was to use later. And so it was 16 weeks or something at Machinist Mate A School. And so every week, after maybe the first 2 weeks, every week they had a test. The tests were on Friday morning, and I think they were done by 9:30. So we would all take our tests, and if you aced your test, that is, got 100 on it, they would release you till midnight on Sunday. So you basically have a 3-day weekend. So I aced all the tests and was able to go home every weekend. And so in my day, we used trains, passenger trains, not the kind of trains they have now, Amtrak. There was Baltimore and Ohio Railroad that ran through my town into Chicago and then up into Great Lakes. So every day, as soon as I would have my bags packed. Every day after I aced my test, I would get on the train to Chicago. Get into Chicago, into the main station, take another train, and that train only went as far as Fostoria, Ohio, which is about 15, 16 miles from my hometown of Tiffin. It's a major railway center. And so from there, from Fostoria, I would hitchhike home on Friday evening. And I would always wear my uniform. And so people in those days respected the military, unlike they do today, where they disrespect the military. They respected the military, and so it wouldn't ever take me more than 5 minutes to get a ride from a trucker or somebody going into Tiffin. So I'd go home, keep my uniform on, go to the Friday night dance, Whereupon all the guys at the dances would look at me and go, oh boy, here we go again. Because I would wear my uniform to the dance, and so there would be lines of girls waiting to get a dance with me because I have my uniform on. And I guess girls are still somewhat partial to men in uniform. So that's what happened with that. And then on the way back, I would have to go back Sunday afternoon. Well, Sunday afternoon, I only had a short walk to the Baltimore and Ohio Railway Station in my hometown. I'd get on the train, go to Chicago, get on a different train back, and make it back by 11:30 or 11:15 in time to get back before midnight. And so that's what I did every week, came home.
All right, so in June of 65 to September of 65, you served aboard the AE-19 USS Diamond Head.
Yes, I did, as a matter of fact. And that brings up another issue, which is the reason I was on the Diamond Head, assigned to that Diamond Head, was it was an interim assignment because sometime during the A School, the recruitment center took me aside and said, your grades are pretty high here, and we want you to join the nuclear power program, which had only been going on for a few years since Admiral Hyman Rickover, the father of nuclear power, was able to start a nuclear power navy with the Nautilus, SSN 571. So they said, we're going to give you this deal. We're going to give you a bonus of $12,000. So $12,000 in 1965 was a pretty good deal. So I said, okay. And he says, oh, what I didn't mention before is I went in as a kiddie cruiser with my 3 buddies from my hometown. I went in when I was 17 years old, joined the Navy. The deal was, as a kiddie cruiser, I would be discharged on my 21st birthday. So they want me to join the nuclear power program. They says, we're not going to send you to school for a year and a half and let you out right away. You got to re-enlist for 3 more years. So instead of 3 years and 3 months, you'll be in for 6 years and 3 months. So I said, okay, I was interested in this anyway, and submarines. So back to the AE-19, I went, it was temporary duty on a surface ship out of Norfolk, Virginia, where signs everywhere in Norfolk, Virginia, which is the biggest Navy base in the world, the signs say, sailors and dogs keep off the grass. Not very inviting, but the parents are concerned for their young daughters with the sailors roaming about free. And so off we sailed on the AE-19 to a Mediterranean cruise. Ammunition ships carry every kind of weaponry that the Navy has, from black powder to different kinds of torpedoes to different kind of rockets and missiles and all of that. So off we go. They told us don't smoke in these certain compartments or you'll blow the ship up, because with all those goodies on the boat, on the ship, we would never have sunk. We would just have disintegrated. So my time on the AE-19 Diamond Head was, I grew up fast because I'm 18, I'm away from home. I've always been told, if it's not yours, don't touch it. So I went to shower, I left my wallet on my rack. That's my bed. So I come back, my rack's empty, there's no wallet, it's gone. So they never got it back. So I learned right there that some people were never told, if it's not yours, don't touch it. So I learned my lesson. I was making $90 a month, so there wasn't much to steal anyway. And so the Diamond Head pulled into a lot of ports. Being an ammunition ship, it couldn't actually go and dock at the port. We had to anchor out in the harbor because they didn't want something to happen to the ship and blow their town apart. So we anchored out and had Liberty boats, Liberty launches they call them. So we'd go down these Jacob's ladders down into the Liberty boat to Liberty. And we first stopped at Lisbon, Portugal, which all the cities in Europe, but Lisbon was the most, it was the most clean. Big towns, cities that I had been to in the United States were full of trash and you know, stuff, papers blowing everywhere and just trash. So in Lisbon, there was no trash. Everything was clean, cobblestone, brick type roads, a city center with a statue and fountains, and it was real nice. And all the houses are the same. They're all built on a hill because Europe is real small. So all the homes are built on a hill, all white houses and melon-colored roofs. So we went to Lisbon. Then we went over to Spain. And the nicest port that I had in the Mediterranean cruise was Palma, Mallorca, Spain. It was an island, beautiful island in the middle of the Mediterranean, tropical climate, wonderful, beautiful place. And I always says, I'm going to go back here someday, but I never have yet. Then we went to Barcelona. Well, Barcelona, we pulled in, anchored off of Barcelona, and everybody, all the sailors got a sheet of paper that said, this is the red light district. Don't go there, bad things will happen. Well, all the sailors made sure they had their paper with the map on it and headed right for it. But not me. I did not go there. And so Barcelona wasn't as clean as Lisbon, but Barcelona was real clean too. And having taken and learned Spanish in high school, I was able to communicate quite a bit in Barcelona the few days. We each stayed at each of these places a couple days, and then we moved on. And the next place we visited was Nice, France. And it was the only place in France we visited. It was very clean, very nice. Everybody's very friendly. And then we went to Italy. 4 cities in Italy we visited. The only 2 I remember were Naples and San Remo, Italy. And being a Romance language, a little bit like Spanish, Italian is enough where you can understand what they're saying, given the words they speak and converting them into Spanish. So, and while I was on that ship, I was a member of the engine room, but when they found out I could type, I also became the engineering room yeoman. And a yeoman is like secretary. So I made out all the daily plannings and did typing for the engineering officer also. And we used these mimeograph machines where you pour ink into this drum and close it and roll it around. And a typewriter, you would have like carbon paper, and you probably don't even know what carbon paper is, but the carbon paper, so we would type on it and it would make holes in the paper. Then we would put the paper on the drum and wheel it around, and the ink would come through the holes while we had the paper on it, and it would do like a negative of what I was trying to type. And so we put out our information like that. And so I worked in the engine room. And one other thing is we had to go around and get what the depth of all the tanks were, because water tanks, to see if we needed to operate a distillation plant, which makes seawater into fresh water by evaporation. It was called an evaporation machine. And we had to do that. And I had to crawl down about 40-step ladder straight down, and back where the drive shaft of the ship went through the hull where the propeller was on the other side, and I had to make sure that the packing gland stuff around the shaft wasn't leaking. And if it was leaking, I was supposed to try to stop it. Well, that was kind of scary for me because I was down there all alone. There were bearings that I had to check that they weren't too hot, and the packing gland had to be cooled with water recirculated around it. But if it had ever leaked too badly, I could never have gotten out of there. So, but it never did, and so I'm glad. And that was basically my duty on the Diamond Head.
All right, after leaving the Diamond Head, you went to Nuclear Power School in Bainbridge, Maryland in October of 1965. Can you tell me about that?
Nuclear Power School in Bainbridge, Maryland. I went there. I got off the Diamond Head. They flew me to Rota, Spain, and from Rota, Spain, I flew to Philadelphia and then down to Bainbridge, Maryland for this nuclear power school. And so it was one of my favorite duties. Actually, all my duties in the Navy were enjoyable, but this was really enjoyable because we got to learn nuclear physics, why a nuclear reactor does what it does and how it does it, and how to control it, and thermodynamics, the 3 laws of thermodynamics, where, by the way, we learned that everything is deteriorating, nothing is going uphill. The Earth is going downhill with entropy. And so we learned thermodynamics, heat transfer and fluid flow. We learned all about atomic structure with metallurgy. There's like numbers of different kind of cell structures. Some of them are strong, some of them are weak, and why they are what they are, the chemistry of the atom, and what different metals do under pressure and under heat. And so it was book learning. In using all of this material, we used a slide rule. There were no computers, so we figured everything out with a slide rule. Normally, you use to the base 10, and we used to the base E, our slide rules, to figure out what we needed for our nuclear physics. And so I just willed my slide rule to my son-in-law, who's studying, getting his PhD in mathematics at the Worcester Polytechnic Institute. I just gave him that, and he was glad to get it. It's called a Pickett slide rule. So that gave me a basis for knowledge for further study. And it was at that time that one of my friends that I talked about that actually went with me into boot camp, he got killed in a fire in Japan, and I learned that, and it kind of was upsetting because he was my real good friend, and he worked on this base with encryption, with top secret military stuff, and it was all encrypted and everything was coded, and you couldn't just get on the base. And so this big fire started, and the building that he was in, and they couldn't get the fire department onto the base quick enough to save anybody. So he got killed in that fire. So that set me back for a few days with my training.
All right, so your time in the nuclear power school lasted about 6 months. So in April of 1965, you went to the Navy Nuclear Power Reactor Prototype School in Ballston Spa, New York.
Yes, it was at that time that I first became acquainted with lake effect snow. Where I lived, where the couple weeks that I had off between nuclear power school and the prototype training, those couple weeks, it was sunny at my house, and so we left to go to prototype training. And one of my roommates, eventual roommates at prototype training, drove his car and picked me up in Fremont, and we went across Interstate 90, and between Cleveland and Buffalo, we came into lake effect snow that was putting snow down like I had never seen, and we just about lost our lives a number of times in that snowstorm. But we were able to make it, and during the nuclear power training, I combined with 4 other guys to rent a home while we were in Saratoga Springs, where we lived. We lived in Saratoga Springs. The reactor site was in Ballston Spa in West Milton, New York. So there were 5 of us. It was the guy with the car actually picked me up, and we took his car to the other place. The other 3 guys didn't have a car. I didn't have a car. The house was a big house in the woods, and there were 3 bedrooms. So the guy with the car says, I'm taking the 1 bedroom. You guys work it out, how you do it. So there were 2 twin beds each in 2 other bedrooms that the other guys, myself and a guy and then 2 other guys, we slept there. And the house was, we did dishes when we ran out of dishes. The counters and sink were constantly like a bachelor pad, only 5 times worse at least. Nobody vacuumed. It was pretty pathetic living situation. So while we were there, we did different assignments. We would go 2 weeks on day shift and 2 days off, 2 weeks on swing shift from 3 till 11 and 3 days off, and then 2 weeks on mid shift from 11 till 7 in the morning and get 5 days off. And we rotated like that for 6 months. We rotated back and forth like that. And we worked on an S3G reactor site in Ballston Spa. The Navy had said we can't send these guys on a submarine without knowing something what they're doing. So we worked on these different sites. They had some destroyer site, and I worked on the S3G. Submarine is the S, G is General Electric, and the 3 was the third part of it, the third update. So it was an actual built engine room under a big ball, and it had the nuclear power plant in it and the engine room and everything where I would be working. So that when I actually went on a submarine later, there was hardly any difference because we had already been doing it. So we had different drills we did, different upkeep on the pumps. We went to pump school and valve school and condenser school and all of that. And they did flooding drills where we were down in the lower level, and they have some pipe start leaking and the water would start coming up, and we learned different methods to use to stop leaks and stuff like that. And so for 6 months, we did that. It's a highly secure area where you had to have a badge to get in and out, and very isolated community north of Schenectady, New York.
All right, after your time in the Navy Nuclear Power Reactor Prototype School, you went to U.S. Navy Submarine School in New London, Connecticut. So is that mostly just a review for you?
The submarine school, that one kind of, it was more about submarines in general and less specific about the actual equipment, more about submarines and what makes a submarine sink and what makes it surface. We learned about trimming water pumps forward and aft, and we learned about ballast, and flooding tanks makes the boat heavier so it sinks. And then there were 3,000 pound per square inch air containers in, not inside the hull, the pressure hull, but outside between the pressure hull and the outside skin of the boat. And they would open those valves and push the water out, and that made us buoyant to come up. And just all about the submarine that we would need to know. And there was a lot of things there. The one part is we had to do escape tank training. Well, I was a swimmer, but escape tank training is a little different. You don't really need to swim, but if you can picture a farm out in the country has a silo, and the silo is a big, huge thing, kind of like the barn at Malone University. It's a big, huge thing. They store grain in it for the animals, so the animals can eat during the winter. Well, if they want to get up on the top, you'll notice there's a little smaller part of that silo that goes up all the way to the top, and that has a ladder in it where the farmer can go up there and check out the level of the grain and stuff. So this escape tank training was a 100-foot tank of water. Yep, 100 feet. Beside it, and the diameter was probably about 30 feet in diameter, 40 feet in diameter. Beside it, connected to it on the outside, was an elevator. So they would take us 10 at a time into this elevator. They would take the elevator down like any other elevator, only they would pressurize it to a pressure equivalent to the pressure of the depth of the water that was in the adjacent tank. So before we had to do this, we had to do some pressure tank training where they would increase the pressure to 100 pounds per square inch and see if whose ears could take it and whose ears couldn't. And so sometimes guys' ears would start bleeding. It would be bleeding down their side of their face, and so they would say, "No, you got to choose a different path. You're not going to make it on submarines." Because in submarines, remind me to tell you about the snorkel on a submarine, but the changes in pressure. So anyway, down we go, down the elevator, pressure. Here we go. We get to the bottom, 100 feet down on the elevator, 100 feet of water on the other side of a hatch that's now open. The only thing keeping the water from 100 feet in that 40-foot diameter water tank is the pressure that they have in our elevator. that's keeping the water on the other side. The water's right up to our chins. So one by one, we go out the hatch and we start up the tank. And the pressure differential on your lungs between 100 feet of water and at the surface is a great deal, where your lungs are compressed, very greatly compressed at 100 feet below the surface of the water. And so if you don't make an equivalent with your lungs as you go up, if you don't discharge air, your lungs will explode and there won't be any more of you. Your lungs will just explode and you'll die. So to ensure that we were discharging enough air that we wouldn't explode our lungs, they had divers and bells. And it's not like the Liberty Bell. It's a little stand, maybe 3 feet in diameter, and a pole up it, and an umbrella-shaped thing at the top that has air pressure in it. And so the divers, who are used to 2 or 3 minutes at a time without breathing underwater, but they have them in these bells where they can actually breathe while they're in that little bell. At 60 feet and 30 feet in that water tank, the divers are standing in the bell, and as you go up, in order for your lungs not to explode, you have to go ho, 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 like that. Yes. Ho, ho, ho is what we did. And so they would drag you and pull you in and look at you and see if you were going ho, ho. If they could hear you and see you doing that, they would shove you off. Then the same thing would happen at 30 feet. The guy would pull you in and look, and if you're doing ho, 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 off you'd go. People who weren't, they pulled them in and stopped them right away. They had to try again or whatever. So on the way up, we were taught to use our hands like a rudder on top of our head. Use our hands like this, and we could steer ourselves. You could steer yourself with your hands to avoid any debris on the surface from whatever collision or happen when you're trying to escape your submarine, and it would protect your head. But by the time you get to the top of 100 feet, you're flying through the air. Your whole body comes out of the water, and you can, yikes! You know, it's very exhilarating. It's very fun. So that was submarine school. New London, Connecticut. And then when I got transferred later on, I had a back injury, but I tried to get out of my escape training because you have a vest on, and I had fallen down a big flight of stairs in the rain and hurt my back real bad, but they said you got to do it, so I went and did it. That was later on when I was stationed in Hawaii.
Okay, and as you can see from your shirt, you served aboard the USS Flasher, SSN 613, and the USS Sculpin, SS 9590. Can you tell me about the Flasher, please?
Yes, I've served very proudly on these two submarines in defense of America. They were both nuclear-powered submarines, and one thing I'd like to note here before we get started is that ships that float are called ships. Submarines are boats. Submarines are not ships. So, the two boats I were on were attack submarines. We carried lots of firepower in the way of torpedoes and sub-rock missiles that we could discharge through our torpedo tubes. Attack submarines, the kind of which I was on, are different from the other kind of submarine that the nuclear navy has, which is fleet ballistic missile submarines, FBMs. Boomers for short. The boomers had two crews, a gold crew and a blue crew. So the gold crew would take the boat out for 2 months or however long the patrol. They're usually around 2 months, maybe a little longer. Meanwhile, the blue crew is in partying down with their families, having a good time, doing training, always constantly training all the time. And then when the gold crew brings the FBM submarine back into port, they turn it over to the blue crew. And that takes a number of weeks, a couple weeks, 3 or 4, to say what all is going to, what all do they need to do to keep the boat going. So then the blue crew takes the boat out, and the gold crew parties down with their family and does training and other things like that. So, but not so on an attack boat. Attack boats, we only had one crew. We did not turn the boat over to another crew. We took the boat out on patrol for 2 months. Then we brought the boat in, and what happened then was we fixed the boat. We did some training, whatever, maybe some schooling, and then we took the boat back out. So on that particular submarine, we made 2 or 3 patrols of 2 months each year. We did Western Pacific cruises of 6 months and visited many ports. So we visited ports in Japan, whereupon in Japan, if you wanted to know where your boat was going to go next, you simply had to go in and talk to the bar girls. Yeah, you went in and talked to the bar girls, and they knew where you were going. And then we also went to places like the Philippines and Hong Kong and Singapore and all those kind of places. But you might ask, how did we propel these boats with using nuclear power? Well, that's a good question. I have something here to help us understand this. In just a few minutes, I'm going to try to explain what took me 6 months to learn. Not because I'm a dummy, but because it's... Okay, this is a pressurized water reactor double loop system. Primary loop is right here. This is the primary loop. The secondary loop comes out here and does all of this. The primary loop, the main function of a nuclear reactor is you have a nuclear reactor in the submarine. All that does is heat the water. Rather than a boiler like on the AE-19 that I was on, the boiler cooked the water and made the steam. Well, nuclear fission with uranium-235, 1 pound of it makes this enough heat to go through this pipe into this steam generator. Changes in speed of the airplane or the submarine makes changes in pressure, and you have this pressurizer with a diaphragm that goes up and down, and so you don't have any spillover. So it goes, this steam from heating from the reactor goes through this pipe, heats water in the steam generator. The higher pressure goes inside the pipe because that's best. The steam generator makes steam, comes through the bulkhead, that's a wall, into this valve. The steam goes along into this gizmo here, it's called a turbine. The steam comes down, turns the wheels in this turbine. Each turbine has about 25 wheels, kind of like the wheels on a paddle boat or a grist mill water. It turns, and turns. The steam loses its pressure and power as it goes down here, so these wheels have to be bigger. So this is a turbine generator. This turbine turns the generator. The generator makes electricity, because if you're underwater, you got to have light. You want to see your movies. You want to run the galley, which is where they make the bread every day, fresh bread. So that makes all the electricity. This one, another valve here. This turbine, bigger turbine, goes, here's the steam pressure here. Pressures keep going down. It's turning this gizmo. This gizmo is the reduction gear. It's kind of like if you drive a stick shift on your car and you move through your gears, you go from a lower gear to a higher gear. This reduction gear goes from a higher speed on this end down to a lower speed and turns this shaft and turns the propeller. And voila, the boat goes through the water. So, how does the steam from the turbines get back into the generator? Well, it has to go through the condenser. You got a condenser here, a condenser here. You got cold seawater coming with a pump. Here's a pump. The cold seawater goes through the condenser. It condenses the steam into water, and then it goes back overboard. Same with this one. It comes from the sea, from the ocean, through the pump, through the condenser, makes this steam, what's left of it, in the water. The water goes here. Here's the pump, pumps it back into the generator where it's heated by this nuclear reactor that has neutrons bumping into uranium-235 atoms and creates additional isotopes which make heat. And you control this with control rods made of zirconium. You can raise and lower these control rods and make more or less heat and more or less power. And by the way, this water here is 500 degrees. 500 degrees, you say. In 4th grade science, I was taught water boils at 212 degrees, but this water is also at 385 pounds per square inch pressure. So it's like a pressure cooker that cooks stuff fast. Yes, it's 500 degrees. And so, do you have any questions about this?
Nope, I don't think so. It's very well drawn, though.
I'm not an artist. It's very rudimentary, but I hope you get the deal. All this reactor does is cook the water, make the heat, make steam. The steam turns the turbines and pushes the boat.
Right, you had wanted me to remind you something about submarine snorkeling?
Oh yes, the snorkeling is how we get air in a submarine when we're at periscope depth. To run the diesel if you have to, just for training or an emergency. So the snorkel, kind of like you see snorkelers on the barrier reef. It's above the water, and it brings air in and runs the diesel motor, the diesel engine, which is bigger, like twice as big as this room, the diesel engine. But if water washes over the snorkel inlet, then where's the air going to come to do the diesel? It comes from inside the boat. And those diesels take a lot of air, and so the boat pressure goes way down, way fast, and it'll make your eardrums pop if you can't equalize your air pressure. So the snorkeling, that's what that does.
All right, so you started on the Sculpin from January of 1970 to November of 1970. Was there much difference between the Flasher and the Sculpin?
No, but in fact, I just happen to have a picture of the Sculpin, which is right here, and it's upside down, and a real nice note from my commanding officer that says, "To Machinist Mate Second Class Richard Talley, USN." Thanking you for a job well done and wishing you the best in your future endeavors. And signed by my commanding officer. And my lovely wife framed this little picture for me. And I basically did the same functions on this submarine as I did with the other one. This submarine was about 10 years older and shorter. After the loss of a couple submarines, they put on a 13-foot section in the middle of the boat for the flasher to add ballast to give the boat a better chance to get to the surface. It provided more ballast for the newer boats. This was a skipjack class, and the flasher was a permit class submarine.
All right, well, thank you for sharing your story. We really enjoyed it.